The heart of Zen tells us, nothing needs to be added for you to be whole. When striving ends, peace quietly appears. Take a slow, deep breath and let it fall away. Find a position that feels comfortable. Maybe you close your eyes, or simply soften your gaze and let your shoulders drop. Tonight, we walk together through stories that are not teachings to memorize, but reminders of what your heart already knows. If you wish, share a thought. What are you feeling tonight? What do you hope these teachings might help you release or understand? For now, there is nothing to do, nothing to grasp, only listening, only resting. Our first story begins now. It moved like time dash, patient, steady, clear. She had come to the water for answers, not about rituals, not about chanting, but about something deeper. Who am I? She had read sutras, memorized verses, and bowed each morning, but still, a knot remained in her chest. The old teacher, sensing her restlessness, came to sit beside her. They watched the water in silence for a while. Then he pointed to a single droplet clinging to a leaf above the current. It trembled. Round, whole, complete. "Is that a drop of water?" the master asked. She nodded. "Yes," he smiled. Then a breeze blew. The droplet fell and joined the river below. The master turned again. "Now tell me, where is the drop?" This is the story of non-self, of how the self we cling to is like a drop, never separate, never alone. Commentary. We walk through life asking, who am I? What is me? Where do I go when I die? But these questions are like trying to bottle the river. The tighter you grip, the more it slips through your fingers. The Buddha taught that what we call a self is not fixed. No eternal soul, no unchanging core, only process, only flow, body, sensation, perception, mental formations, consciousness. These 5 aggregates arise and pass like waves. There is no boat, only current. The novice sat with this for many days. She stared at her reflection in the water, noticing how it changed when the wind blew, how it vanished when a stone was thrown, how it returned when the ripples faded. Was the reflection real? Yes. Was it solid? So too with the self. We exist, but not as a thing, as a movement, a flame, not a statue, a song, not a stone. One night, the novice had a dream. She stood before a vast river. She cupped water in her hands, holding it close, but it began to spill, to slip between her fingers, to return to the source. In the dream, she let it go and wept, not from sadness, but relief, because in letting go of the drop, she felt the whole river. When she woke, she wrote a single line in her journal. I am not a drop in the river, I am the river in a drop. This is the heart of rebirth too, not the soul traveling from body to body, but conditions unfolding, like water taking many forms, cloud, rain, stream, mist, but always water. You are not this name, not this face, not even this mind. You are this moment, arising from countless causes and dissolving into new ones. When the master was old and dying, the novice, now a teacher, sat by his side. She asked him if he was afraid. He smiled faintly and said, "A drop returns to the river. How can it fear?" Then he closed his eyes and was gone. But the river kept flowing. So the next time you feel small or lost or alone, remember the drop and the river it was never truly apart from. The lake shimmered like a mirror at dawn. Mist hovered just above the water, rising in soft spirals. On its banks, reeds bowed gently in the morning breeze, and lotus blossoms opened their pink faces to the sun. In the middle of the lake stood a small island, quiet, green and hidden from the world. And on this island, in a nest woven from reeds and grace, lived a bird unlike any other. He was a mallard, but not an ordinary one. His feathers were not grey or brown, but a deep, radiant gold. He glowed like a flame in flight, and his heart was as generous as his form was rare. He was the Buddha in one of his many past lives. Once, long ago, he had been a man, a kind and devoted father to 3 daughters. After his death, reborn as a golden bird, he remembered the love he had once held for his family. "I cannot be their father again," he thought, "but I can still care for them." So he flew across hills and rivers, forests and fields, until he reached the cottage where his daughters now lived, alone, in quiet poverty. He landed gently on the windowsill. When the eldest daughter saw the glowing bird, her eyes widened. The bird spoke, softly, from a heart still bound by love. "I have come to help. Pluck one of my feathers and sell it. It will feed you for many days." The girl hesitated, but the bird bowed his head. "It is freely given." She plucked a single feather, golden, smooth, and warm to the touch. And as the mallard took flight again, the room seemed to glow with a little more hope. Days passed, then weeks, and each time the daughters began to hunger, the bird returned, offering a single feather, no more. Their home grew brighter, their faces fuller. But the bird too remained bright, his feathers returning, his heart untroubled. Until one day, greed crept into the house like a shadow at dusk. The youngest daughter asked, "Why does he give only one at a time?" The middle daughter frowned. "He has many. If we plucked them all at once, we would be rich forever." The eldest hesitated. "But he gives them freely from kindness." "Kindness is slow," said the middle one. "We need certainty." And so, one morning, when the golden mallard returned, the daughters did not greet him with bows or thanks. They seized him and plucked, not one, but all. The bird cried out, not in pain, but in sorrow. His wings weakened. His glow faded. The warmth in his eyes dulled like a dying flame. And when the daughters looked down, the feathers they held were no longer gold. Just grey, dull, ordinary, lifeless. As was the bird now lying still in their hands. They gasped. "What happened? Where is the gold?" But no answer came. The mallard lay motionless, too hurt to fly, too kind to curse, and the daughters, stunned and panicked, placed him back in the nest of reeds on the island, hoping he would heal. Weeks passed. The bird recovered. His feathers grew back, slowly, one by one. And though they shone again, He never returned to the cottage. He had given without condition, but greed had mistaken gift for possession, and in doing so, had severed the bond of love. In the forest beyond the lake, an old monk would later say, "A gift freely given must be received with humility. To snatch what is not offered is to lose more than gold. It is to wound the very heart that loves you." In time, the daughters came to understand their mistake, not because they lost their wealth, but because they lost his trust, and no coin can buy that back. The tale of the golden mallard spread from one village to another, told by firelight, whispered by parents to children, painted on temple walls in hues of radiant yellow, not as a warning against birds, but as a lesson about giving and taking. Because true generosity is not a stream to be dammed. It flows, it offers, but it must never be forced. And the purest gifts come not with conditions, but with open wings. In the quiet of a forest monastery, the Buddha once said to his disciples, "There is giving that seeks applause, and there is giving that seeks nothing. The first shines for a moment, the second for lifetimes." Every morning at 6:15 she opened the curtains. The light crept in slowly, soft and golden, and the photo on the mantel caught it just right. It was old, sepia-toned, edges curled like leaves in autumn. A man in uniform, smiling, handsome, still young. Her husband, gone now for 17 years. Miriam never moved the photo. It stayed on the same spot. Third tile from the right, 2 inches from the lamp. She didn't talk to it, didn't cry over it. She simply saw it. Every day. Grief for her had stopped being a storm. It had become weather, something you dress for, something you feel without needing to fight. Once, her granddaughter asked, "Why don't you get rid of that old photo? You have better ones on your phone." Miriam just smiled. That one isn't for looking. It's for remembering. Her husband had died in his sleep. No warnings, no pain, just silence. She found him in the morning, hands still curled as if holding a dream. She didn't scream, didn't collapse. She sat beside him, held his hand and whispered, "Thank you." People told her to be strong. She didn't try. She simply continued. At the temple nearby, the monks would speak of impermanence, of how everything changes, how attachment creates suffering. Miriam understood this. Not as an idea, but as a reality. She loved her husband deeply, but she did not clutch him. Even in his absence, she let him be gone. And in doing so, he never truly left. There's a Zen teaching. To hold a butterfly, you must open your palm. Miriam didn't keep a shrine, didn't tell his story over and over. She just lived in a way that would make him proud. She tended the garden they once planted together. She drank the coffee he used to brew. She folded his shirts one last time and gave them away. Not because she stopped loving him, but because she didn't want her love to become a cage. One day, a neighbor lost her husband. She came to Miriam, eyes red, voice shaking. "I don't know how to live without him." Miriam poured tea, sat with her, said nothing at first, then quietly offered, "You don't live without him. You live with the part of him that still breathes in you." The neighbor sobbed. And Miriam did not stop her. She just placed a hand on hers and let it be. Love doesn't end. It changes shape, and grief, too, is a form of love, one that knows how to bow. Miriam is older now, hands soft with age, memories flickering at the edges, but she still opens the curtains each morning, still lets the light find the photo, not to bring him back, but to let him go again, gently, lovingly, without holding. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a tale about recognition and the true nature of worth. This is the next story. There was a spider who spun her web in the rafters of the meditation hall. No one noticed her at first. She was small, thin-legged, her thread finer than the morning mist. But slowly, as the days passed, her web grew, spanning beam to beam. A fragile bridge suspended in stillness. A young monk sweeping the floors one morning looked up. He paused. Something about the web held him. It glimmered faintly in the dawn light, each thread stretching toward another as if in quiet conversation. He brought his discovery to the abbot. "Should I remove it?" he asked. "It doesn't belong in the hall." The abbot looked up, tilted his head, smiled. "She belongs exactly where she is," he said, "and perhaps she's teaching more than we are." From that day forward, the monks left the web untouched. They meditated beneath it, bowed in its presence, watched as dew sometimes gathered along its strands, like pearls of stillness. One day, the young monk saw a tiny gnat caught in the web. He felt a pang of sorrow, moved closer, but before he could act, the spider emerged, wrapped the insect, and retreated. He asked the abbot again, "How can something so beautiful cause harm?" The abbot nodded slowly. "A web is not cruel," he said. "It is simply a truth." He continued, "Connection is not always comfort, but everything touches everything else." He gestured around the hall. "You see walls, mats, windows, candles, but they are not separate." He pointed up. "That spider reminds us. One thread trembles, and the whole web feels it." The monk began to notice more. How a sharp word at breakfast changed the tone of the morning. How a kind gesture rippled through the day. How his own thoughts, when tangled, echoed outward into others. One evening during Zazen, a gust of wind slipped through the shutters. The spider's web quivered, and every monk in the room turned slightly. Not toward the wind, but toward the movement of the web, as if they all felt it at once. There is a teaching in the Avatamsaka Sutra. In the realm of Indra's net, each jewel reflects all others. To touch one is to touch the whole. The spider did not preach. She simply spun, her work invisible until noticed, and then unforgettable. Months later, the web collapsed in a storm. Gone, no trace. But the young monk no longer looked for it above. He had begun to see the web everywhere. In the way the cook's ladle touched the soup pot, in the way the bell echoed down the hallway, in the way a smile from a stranger reached deep into his chest. Everything, connected, everything, touching, nothing, alone. The Buddha sat beneath a sal tree where the light filtered through in flickering gold. The breeze played gently with the hem of his robe, and the scent of early jasmine lingered in the air. Around him, The monks gathered like ripples around a pebble dropped in a still pond. Quiet, present, steady. They bowed one by one and took their seats on the grass, robes the colour of ochre and clay. The forest around them hummed with life, birds calling from high branches, the distant crack of bamboo, and the low murmur of wind moving through tall grass. The Buddha's eyes remained half lowered, still and soft. Then from the circle, a young monk rose. He was thin, his frame taut with discipline, but his brow was furrowed, his lips pressed with quiet unrest. He stepped forward and bowed deeply. "Master," he said, "I have studied the teachings as best I can. I rise before dawn. I recite every sutra. I memorize every verse. I follow every precept. And still, I suffer. Still my mind is troubled. I fear I've become attached to the very teachings meant to free me." He hesitated. Am I clinging to the Dharma itself? The Buddha looked upon him gently. "You remind me of a traveler," he said. "Let me tell you a story." The monks settled deeper into stillness. The forest too seemed to pause. "There was once a man," the Buddha began, "wandering through a thick and treacherous forest. The trees were close, the thorns sharp. On all sides he was hemmed in by danger, wild beasts, hunger, cries in the distance that made his skin crawl. For hours, maybe days, he pushed forward, uncertain and afraid, until he came to a wide, roaring river. On the other side, he could see sunlight falling on an open path. He saw smoke curling from a distant hut. Safety, rest, the way forward." The Buddha paused, letting the image take shape. But there was no bridge, no boat. The current was fierce. He could not swim across without being swept away. So the man worked. He cut branches, wove reeds, bent saplings into shape. With patience, sweat, and determination, he fashioned a raft, just strong enough to carry him. He clutched it tightly, guided it across the swirling water. His heart pounded with fear, but he reached the far bank, soaked, trembling, but alive. The Buddha's eyes swept slowly across the circle of monks. "Now imagine," he continued, "that once on land, the man looked at the raft and said, 'This has saved me. This is precious. I will carry it with me always.' And so he lifted it onto his shoulders and continued his journey, the heavy wood digging into his back, slowing his steps, wearing him down." A faint rustle of recognition moved through the group. "Would that make sense?" the Buddha asked. The monks shook their heads. "Of course not," the Buddha said. "The raft served its purpose. It brought him across. To carry it afterward, to cling to it, would only bring suffering." He turned to the young monk. "So too with the Dharma." The monk blinked, uncertain. "But the teachings are sacred," he said. "Aren't they to be kept close? Aren't they the source of liberation?" The Buddha nodded. "They are sacred, but sacred does not mean permanent. The Dharma is not a cage. It is not a burden to be shouldered forever. It is a tool, a raft, a means to cross the river of confusion and craving. Once you have crossed, you need not drag the boat behind you." Another monk raised his hand. "Master," he asked softly, "what if one forgets or finds themselves back at the river?" "Then rebuild the raft," said the Buddha. "Relearn, Begin again, but never mistake the raft for the shore. The Dharma is not the destination, it is the guide. A hush followed, filled only by the hush of the wind and the rhythmic clicking of cicadas. Later that evening, as the sun descended behind the line of trees and turned the sky to a warm, bruised lavender, the monks returned to their huts, some with new questions, others with lighter hearts. But the young monk lingered. He wandered to the river near the monastery, where the water curled gently around stones and reeds. He sat on the bank, knees pulled in, and listened. The moon had begun its slow rise, casting silver light across the ripples. The monk breathed deeply. He thought of the teachings he had memorized, the sutras chanted, the rules obeyed, the rituals performed. Each had been a plank, a vine, a thread in the raft that carried him across his inner storm. He remembered the fear that had driven him to this path, the grief of his father's death, the anger he once held like a fire in his chest, the shame of worldly desire. Each teaching had helped him cross some inner current, but now, here he sat, dry but weary, clutching the raft as though it were still necessary. And he saw. He had carried not just the teachings, but his pride in them, his fear of failure, his guilt for each imperfect thought, his grasping for perfection, and all of these too were rafts, built to carry him through old pain, meant to be honored, yes, but then let go. He closed his eyes. The breeze shifted. The night deepened. By morning, he rose and returned to the Buddha. He bowed low, his hands open, his heart quiet. I have crossed, he said softly, and the Buddha replied, then walk freely. No further instruction, no ceremony. Just a smile, the kind that sees without needing to explain. Because truth, like a raft, is not meant to be worshipped. It is meant to be used, held for a time, then released. And so the monk walked on, not empty, but unburdened. He still chanted, still meditated, still studied the sutras. But now he did so not out of fear, not to be perfect, but because he understood their purpose. They were not chains, they were maps, and once you arrive, you do not need the map to breathe. Years later, when a new monk came with the same question, full of guilt, clinging to rules like a man clutching driftwood, he told him of the raft. He pointed to the river and smiled. At the corner of Maple and Fifth, there stood a little cafe that never advertised. No neon signs, no digital menus. Just a chalkboard easel that read, "Come in, breathe, sip slowly." Inside, the scent of cinnamon and ground espresso lingered like an old song. And behind the counter moved Raya. She didn't move quickly, not because she was lazy, but because every motion mattered. Scoop, steam, pour, wipe. A rhythm of care, repeated hundreds of times a day. Customers noticed. They came stressed, hurried, multitasking, but left quieter. Because somehow, even in the rush of morning lines, Raya made you feel like time had paused. She wore no uniform, only soft linen aprons and a tiny brass bell around her wrist. It didn't jingle constantly, just gently when she turned or wiped the counter or placed a mug just right. A small sound, but intentional. One day, a man asked her, "What's the bell for?" aesthetic. Raya smiled. It's a reminder, she said, to return to the moment. The bell had come from a monastery in Korea, a gift from a traveling monk who had passed through one rainy morning, soaked to the bone, but smiling like the clouds had kissed him. He'd ordered chamomile tea, sat for an hour, said nothing, and when he left, he gave her the bell. For your practice, he had whispered. At first, she didn't know what he meant. But over time, she came to understand. Every chime was a callback. Back to the steam rising from the milk. Back to the texture of ceramic under her fingertips. Back to the presence of the person in front of her. One regular, a nurse named Ellie, used to joke, "You're the only person who can make caffeine feel calming." Raya just laughed, but she knew why. It wasn't the coffee, it was the attention. The Buddha once said, "When walking, just walk. When sitting, just sit. Above all, don't wobble." Raya lived that. In a world addicted to wobbling. One afternoon, a man burst in, frantic. His phone had died. He was late for a pitch. He spilled his order twice in his rush. But Raya didn't scold. She simply placed the cup on the counter slowly. Her bell chimed. He paused, looked up. And in that pause, he breathed. It lasted only a second, but it was enough. Presence doesn't need hours. It needs moments, noticed fully. Years passed. The cafe stayed small, never franchised, never changed hands, but its walls soaked in thousands of quiet returns. One morning, Raya didn't show up. A handwritten sign appeared. Back in 3 days, practicing stillness. Customers waited, and when she returned, they smiled. Because somehow, her absence had reminded them. Even a barista needs to refill the cup. The bell still chimed, still soft, still enough. A sound that said, "You're here, be here." As we move deeper into the quiet teachings of Zen, we come to a story about seeing clearly and understanding true value. Listen carefully to the next story. In the days when animals still spoke the language of the wind and trees, there lived a turtle in a wide, sparkling pond near the edge of a small village. The water was clean. The lilies bloomed. Dragonflies shimmered like tiny blades of light, and frogs sang in harmony beneath the moon. And in the center of it all, floating lazily on a flat, sun-warmed rock, was a turtle with a sharp mind and a sharper tongue. He was clever, observant, wise even, but he had one weakness. He could not stop talking. This turtle, who in a past life had been the Buddha, spent his days offering advice to fish, telling stories to tadpoles, and correcting the herons who perched too long on the reeds. He spoke of the stars, of the weather, of the foolishness of men and the arrogance of birds. And many listened at first. But over time, some began to swim a little farther from his rock. The frogs coughed politely and leapt away. Even the dragonflies found quieter lily pads to rest on. Still, the turtle spoke. He spoke when no one was near. He spoke when others slept. He spoke not to be heard, but because silence felt like drowning. One summer, the rains did not come. The sky cracked but gave no water. The pond shrank. Lilies withered. The fish moved deeper, their numbers fewer each day. 2 wild geese, passing overhead, noticed the shrinking pond and circled down. They landed beside the turtle and dipped their beaks in the muddy shallows. "This place won't last much longer," one said. "Soon it will be dry." The other nodded. "We should help whoever we can." The turtle, curious, swam closer. "Help? How?" The first goose blinked. "We will carry the small fish to deeper waters, and if you like, we can carry you too." The turtle's eyes widened. "You would do that?" "Of course," said the second goose, "but only if you can stay silent." "Silent?" the turtle echoed. "Yes," said the first. "We will hold a stick between our beaks. You must bite down on the center and hold on. But if you speak, even one word, you'll fall." The turtle hesitated. Not talk? For an entire journey? He looked around. The pond was shrinking. His friends were gone. The mud cracked beneath the sun. He took a breath. "Very well," he said. "I will be silent." The next morning, the geese returned with a sturdy stick. They each gripped one end in their beaks. The turtle bit down on the center with determination. Together, they rose into the sky, wings strong, the turtle dangling like a pendant between them. He had never seen the world like this before. Forests stretched like ocean waves. Rivers wound like silver ropes. Hills rolled beneath them like sleeping beasts. And far below, people looked up and pointed. "Look!" a child cried. "A flying turtle!" Laughter rippled through the village. A man shaded his eyes. "What a strange sight! A turtle who thinks he's a bird." They laughed louder. They clapped and jeered. The turtle heard every word. His mouth tightened on the stick. He thought of clever comebacks, of biting remarks, of lessons he could teach these fools from above. And then he couldn't help himself. "I'll show you who's foolish." But the moment his mouth opened, he fell. Down, down through the sky, tumbling through wind and silence and regret until he struck the earth and never rose again. The geese circled once, then flew on. And below, the villagers stood in stunned silence beside the broken shell of the creature who could not stay silent. Later, when this tale reached the forest monasteries, a monk asked the Buddha, "Was the turtle's mistake pride?" "No," said the Buddha, "it was attachment. Not to his body, but to his voice, to the belief that every thought must be shared." He looked at the monk kindly. "There is wisdom in knowing when to speak, but greater wisdom in knowing when not to." And so, the story of the turtle who couldn't stop talking passed from village to village. Not as mockery, but as reminder that words are like seeds. They grow even when we forget we've planted them, and some, if spoken at the wrong time, can fall like stones. Because restraint is not weakness. It is strength disguised as silence. And sometimes, silence is the loudest wisdom of all. They worked for 7 days without rest, 4 monks, bent over low tables, hands steady, breath slow. Grain by grain, they placed colored sand onto a wide wooden platform, creating a mandala of breathtaking beauty. Circles inside circles, lotus petals, Buddhas seated in calm symmetry, tiny bridges crossing into sacred realms. It was more than art. It was a world. And they built it, knowing it would not last. Villagers came to watch. Children gasped. Old men wept. Even travelers paused on their way to market, drawn in by the silence, the precision, the colors blooming under careful fingers. Each night, the monks covered the mandala with a cloth. Each morning, they returned to their posture, like time itself had been paused. Not one grain out of place, not one breath wasted. On the 8th day, the abbot arrived. He walked around the mandala in silence, once, twice. Then he bowed and said only 4 words, "It is time now." One of the monks picked up a long white feather. He reached toward the center of the mandala and drew a single line through it. The design fractured instantly. A second stroke, then a third. The patterns dissolved. The colors blurred. What had taken a week to build unraveled in minutes, like a dream returning to mist. Some gasped, others cried, but the monks only bowed, then gathered the sand in a simple clay bowl. They walked together to the river. With a small prayer, they tipped the bowl, and the sand returned to water, color to flow, form to formlessness. Gone. This is the story of letting go, of beauty not owned, of effort not clung to, of creation not possessed. Commentary. The sand mandala is one of the clearest teachings in Mahayana Buddhism, not because of how it looks, but because of what happens after. In the West, we celebrate permanence. We build to last. We frame art. We publish books. We try to leave a legacy. But in Buddhism, there is no permanence, only appearance, only change, only flow. The monks poured their hearts into the mandala, their care, their breath, their presence. They built it not despite its impermanence, but because of it. They knew it would vanish, and they still gave everything. That is love without grasping, effort without ego, joy without needing to possess. The act of destroying the mandala is not cruelty, it is compassion. A reminder, everything we cling to will one day dissolve. Beauty, youth, achievement, even memory. We can either mourn this endlessly or bow to it. There is a phrase in the Diamond Sutra. All conditioned things are like a dream, a phantom, a bubble, a shadow, like dew or a flash of lightning. Thus we shall view them. It doesn't mean nothing matters. It means everything matters more deeply when you know it's passing. You love your child's laughter more when you know they won't be 5 forever. You savour tea more when it's the last cup from the pot. You forgive faster when you realise tomorrow isn't promised. One woman who watched the mandala's destruction approached the abbot in tears. "All that work," she said, "and now it's gone." The abbot bowed. "That is why it was precious," he replied. "When we cling, we suffer. When we release, we flow." This doesn't mean becoming detached or cold. It means seeing clearly and trusting what passes. Trusting that even after the mandala is gone, the hands that built it are still steady. The breath that guided it is still with you. The river still carries the colors. Life is not meant to be grasped. It is meant to be given, again and again, like sand to a current. So build your mandalas, love your people, paint your days with color. But don't try to trap the moment. Let it come, let it shine. And when it's time, let it go. And perhaps, like the monks at the river, smile while you do. At the edge of a quiet village stood a grove of bamboo. Tall, slender, green like fresh thought. Children played between the stalks. Lovers carved initials in their husks. The wind passed through them like a flute, and they bent, bowed, never snapped. Even in the worst monsoons, when roofs were torn and trees cracked in two, the bamboo always remained, not by resisting, but by yielding. The villagers took comfort in them, the way they swayed without fear, the way they seemed to whisper, "It is okay to move with what comes." One year, a powerful storm swept through the valley, the kind that arrives with no warning, just a sudden hush, then a roar like sky breaking. Palm trees were flung sideways. The great banyan lost a limb, crops flattened, roofs lifted like paper, and yet, in the morning light, the bamboo still stood, drenched, bent, but alive. An old monk named Tenzin watched from his hut on the hill. After the storm passed, he gathered his students and led them to the grove. He said nothing at first, just stood beside the bamboo. One student broke the silence. "Master, how did these survive?" Tenzin smiled. "The bamboo," he said, "has no pride in its strength, only trust in its roots and the wisdom to bend." Another student frowned. "But isn't bending the same as giving in?" Tenzin tapped one stalk gently with his hand. "Does this feel weak to you?" The bamboo swayed slightly, not from impact, just from being what it is. "No," he continued, "bending is not defeat. It is relationship. To wind, to time, to life, to understand that resisting everything is how things break." The students were quiet. Tenzin knelt beside one stalk, pressed his hand to the wet earth. "There is a lesson here," he said softly. "The strong oak is proud until lightning splits it. The mountain stands tall until earthquake shakes it. But the bamboo, it lives by letting go of control. It knows the storm will not ask permission, so it dances instead of breaking." Later that week, a young woman in the village fell ill. Severe, sudden. The doctor said it would be weeks before she could walk again. She was bitter, frustrated. Tenzin visited her, sat beside her without judgment. And after a long silence, he said, "You're in a storm now. You cannot control the wind, but you can soften. Not give up, just give in. To healing, to stillness, to time." She cried, and in that surrender, healing began. Months passed, the village rebuilt. The trees grew back slowly, but the bamboo never changed much. It didn't need to, because it had already learned what others forgot, that survival is not always about standing firm. Sometimes it's about moving with grace. There is a line in a Zen poem, "Be like bamboo, deep-rooted, open-jointed, hollow-hearted. What bends does not break. What yields is not weak. And what allows itself to sway teaches us what it means to stay." With each step on the Zen path, a new lesson unfolds. Now we turn to a story about recognition, of self, of others, and of what truly matters. Listen carefully to the next story. A novice had a restless mind. He tried to sit, tried to breathe, tried to still the thoughts, but each time he closed his eyes, his mind swirled. Lists, regrets, what ifs, what nexts. He couldn't find peace, and the more he tried to force stillness, the louder everything seemed to become. One morning, after failing again to meditate, he stood up in frustration. "I'm broken," he muttered. And he walked, head down, steps fast, until he nearly collided with the old groundskeeper, Master Rio. Rio was known for his silence. He didn't teach. He didn't lecture. He just tended the gardens and cleaned the gutters. But he had been at the temple longer than anyone. The novice bowed clumsily. "Forgive me, Master." Rio tilted his head, studying him. "You're not breathing like a monk," he said. The novice looked up, startled. Rio turned, motioning for him to follow. They walked in silence through the bamboo grove to the kitchen courtyard, where a wide clay bowl stood filled with clear water. "Sit," Rio said. The novice sat. Rio picked up a small stick, and without a word, he stirred the water, gently at first, then faster, until the surface churned and the reflection broke into chaos. The novice watched. Then Rio set the stick down. They sat in silence. The bowl shimmered, then slowed, then stilled. The novice could suddenly see his own face again in the reflection. Rio looked at him and asked, "Did I make the water still?" The novice blinked. "Number it settled by itself." Rio nodded. "So will your mind." And he walked away. This is the story of trusting the stillness beneath disturbance. Commentary. Many people believe meditation is about forcing silence, forcing peace, erasing all thought. But in truth, it is about letting the water settle. Your mind is like a bowl of clear water. Every thought, every worry, every fear is like a stick stirring it. The more you react, the more you stir. The more you chase silence, the more turbulence you create. But if you sit and breathe and wait without judgment, the water begins to settle on its own. This is the natural wisdom of the mind. You don't need to fix it. You need to allow it. There's a Zen saying, "Muddy water clears itself if left alone." The novice learned something that day, not from a sutra, not from a formal teaching, but from water. He stopped fighting his thoughts. Instead, he watched them. Like leaves drifting across a pond. He stopped demanding they leave, and instead bowed as they passed. And slowly, something began to shift, not instantly, but gently, like the bowl that stopped churning the moment no hand stirred it. This is how peace comes. Not by control, not by perfection, but by patience, by the quiet knowing that nothing stirred stays stirred forever. If you are anxious, sit like the bowl. If you are overwhelmed, breathe like the wind that forgets itself. If you are angry, wait like the pond after rain. It will pass, all of it. And when it does, clarity returns. You'll see your reflection again. Not because you forced it, but because you didn't run. So next time you feel lost in thought, don't fix, don't flee, just wait. And let the water be water. The monsoon rains had passed, and the forest paths of Kosambi steamed with quiet life. Leaves dripped with silver beads. Frogs croaked low from the shadows. And above it all, The scent of wet bark and jasmine lingered like breath held too long. Under a canopy of tall sal trees, the Buddha sat surrounded by monks. They had walked for days to gather here. Some were old, most were young, their robes still crisp from devotion, their minds still sharp with questions. And today, the Blessed One had agreed to speak, not of morality, nor of meditation, but of something far subtler, of misunderstanding. He began, not with pronouncement, but with silence. Then, as the breeze shifted through the trees, he spoke. "There are those," he said, "who come to the Dharma like a man searching for a serpent." A few monks glanced up. Serpents were no small matter in these woods, slender and swift, some deadly, some divine. "This man," the Buddha continued, "is told that a snake dwells near the roots of a great tree, so he goes into the forest to catch it. But he does not learn the proper way. He does not bring a forked stick. He does not wait for the right moment. He sees movement in the grass and lunges with bare hands." A few younger monks leaned forward. "What happens?" one whispered. The Buddha's gaze passed over them like moonlight on water. "He seizes the snake by the tail." A ripple of discomfort passed through the listeners. "And the snake," he said, "twists and strikes." He paused. "And so it is with those who take hold of the Dharma wrongly, grasping at the tail, not understanding the nature of what they hold. And when it turns against them, they blame the teaching, never seeing that it was their own hand that erred." Silence fell again. It was not a parable to soothe, but to stir. For many in that circle had studied hard, memorized discourses, debated with pride. They recited verses in the marketplace, corrected others in the villages, and took satisfaction in knowing the words of the Buddha by heart. But the words were not the snake, and the Buddha knew it. A senior monk, Kakana, bowed his head and asked softly, "Blessed One, how does one hold the Dharma correctly?" The Buddha nodded. "Imagine," he said, "a man crossing a river. The current is swift, the far bank promises safety, and he finds no boat, no bridge. So he gathers branches, grass, and reeds. He binds them tightly. He makes a raft." The monks followed, some nodding. With effort, he crosses the water. And when he reaches the other shore, does he carry the raft on his back for the rest of the journey? A few smiled. A few looked unsure. "No," said the Buddha. "He leaves it behind, grateful, respectful, but he does not cling to it. He let that image hang in the warm, moist air." "So too is the Dharma," he said, "a raft to cross, not a burden to bear forever, not a weapon to strike others, not a badge to wear." A soft murmur of recognition passed through the monks. "But some," he continued, "treat the Dharma as the man who grabs the snake's tail. They take hold of words, of verses, of rules, not to cross the river, but to shout from the shore." He turned his palm upward. "They say, 'I know,' you do not. They say, 'This is the only way, yours is wrong.' They say, 'I have read, I have memorized, I have mastered.'" He paused. "But what have they understood?" A breeze stirred the forest floor. A leaf spiraled down like a question with no answer. "Understanding," he said, "is not repetition. Wisdom is not memorization, and truth is not a prize to be clutched." He looked at them all. Do not seize the tail. Learn how the snake moves. Watch, be still, approach with care. Grasp rightly, not to own, but to understand. A young novice, no older than 15, raised his hand timidly. But blessed one, he said, what if one clings to the raft out of reverence? Out of gratitude? The Buddha smiled gently. Reverence is not the same as attachment, he said. Gratitude flows like a river. Clinging dams the stream. He folded his hands in his lap. To let go does not mean to forget. It means to honor the purpose and move on when it has been fulfilled. Several monks bowed. Some looked thoughtful, others uneasy, for the teaching had pierced the pride of many. A monk named Sati, known for his keen memory and rigid interpretations, frowned. But Lord, he said, should we not defend the Dharma from false views? Yes, said the Buddha without hesitation. But first, defend it from misunderstanding within yourself. A man who argues from ego may win the debate and lose the path. He looked directly at Sati. If you know a verse, but use it to shame another, you have caught the tail. He turned to the group once more. If you teach to elevate yourself, you have caught the tail. If you study only to be praised, you have caught the tail. If you hold to rules to feel superior, you have caught the tail. And if you mistake knowledge for wisdom, you have caught the tail. The forest was utterly still now. Even the birds had quieted. And when the snake turns and bites, the Buddha asked, you will say the Dharma is false, that it failed you, that it was sharp, cruel, or useless, but the snake was never to blame. A few monks bowed their heads in shame. One of the older mendicants, seated on a mat of grass near the front, exhaled deeply. I have clutched many tails in my time, he said, but now I wish only to learn how to see clearly. The Buddha nodded. That is the beginning of wisdom. That evening, as twilight turned the forest gold, the monks moved quietly through the camp. No chants, no debates, just footsteps and thought. Sati sat alone by the fire, his manuscript scrolls untouched. The novice who had asked about the raft sat beside him, quiet, respectful. Sati turned and whispered, I used to think that knowing every word would make me wise. The boy looked at him. And now? Sati stared at the flames. Now I wonder if I even know how to listen. In the stillness of the forest, the words of the Buddha echoed like a distant bell. Do not grasp the tail, learn how the snake moves. And in the hearts of those who truly listened, the Dharma shed its scales of pride, of certainty, of rigid form, and began, at last, to breathe. The master was dying, not suddenly, not tragically, just quietly, like a season completing itself. His name was Master Togen, and he had taught for over 40 years. He never raised his voice, never insisted, never asked to be followed. But people came to him, pilgrims, monks, farmers, children. Because when he looked at you, you felt seen beyond your name. Now, his breath was thin, his hands still, his body a whisper of what it once was. The disciples gathered at his bedside, each wondering the same thing. Would he speak? Would he leave them with one final truth, a farewell teaching, a verse, a koan? They waited, hearts leaning forward. But Master Togen said nothing, not even a word. He only gestured, weakly, to the small table beside his mat. Upon it stood a single candle, lit and steady. The wax had melted low. The flame burned soft but sure. The master's eyes lingered on it. Then he closed them and let go. The room held its breath. The disciples watched the candle. It flickered once, then twice, and just as the master's body cooled, the candle went out. No wind, no touch. It simply ended. This is the story of teaching through presence, of the final lesson not spoken, but lived. Commentary. We often believe the greatest teachings must be loud, dramatic, revolutionary, clear. But in Zen, the most profound truths are quiet. They arrive not with thunder, but with the stillness of a candle extinguishing itself. Master Togen's disciples wanted words, something to cling to quote, to remember. But he gave them something deeper, a mirror. The candle was his body, burning with presence, giving light, warming others, and when its time came, it did not resist, it did not protest, it simply completed its purpose and disappeared. That is the nature of life. To arrive, to offer, to pass. To resist this is to suffer. To accept it is to awaken. Some monks cried. Some stared at the floor. But one young disciple remained still, eyes on the wick. He bowed deeply and said, "I understand." The abbot later asked him, "What did you understand?" The young monk replied, "Nothing lasts, but everything lights the way while it's here." We fear death, but what we fear more is the idea of being forgotten, of being meaningless. So we seek last words, final victories, something to prove we existed. But Master Togen left only a flame, because the point was not to be remembered. It was to burn fully while here. The candle did not save its wax, did not ration its glow. It gave everything, slowly, humbly, until there was nothing left to give. And then it bowed out. That was his teaching. There is a Zen phrase, "When the light is gone, do not seek it in the ashes." The disciples learned this that day, not from a sermon, but from the absence that remained. Master Togen lives on, not in statues, not in scriptures, not in recorded sayings, but in how the monks now move. With care, with presence, with awareness that each moment is a wick, each breath a flame. So when your time comes, be like the candle. Don't worry about your legacy. Focus on your light. As our exploration of Zen Buddhism deepens, let us listen to a story that reveals how true worth is often overlooked. Here starts the next story. The banks of the Ganges shimmered with morning light. Mist curled like white breath from the earth, and birds traced wide arcs above the water. The river flowed as it always had, unhurried, ancient, indifferent. Upon a small rise near the city of Gaya, the Buddha stood. His saffron robes caught the first golden threads of sunlight, and his presence seemed to quiet even the wind. Around him gathered 1,000 ascetics, silent, weathered, lean with years of discipline. Their robes were coarse, their skin bronzed by fire and wind. Their eyes held questions that words could not form. They had come to hear him, not because he promised liberation, but because he had found it. These were men who had walked barefoot on burning sand, who had held their breath until stars blurred in their vision, who had fasted until even hunger grew silent. They had known pain. They had studied sacred fire. They had chanted, scarred, endured. But they had not known peace. And so they came, not to challenge, but to listen. The Buddha began not with praise, nor with rules, nor with doctrine. He began with fire. All is burning, he said. A ripple moved through the crowd like wind across tall grass. He paused. Let the silence stretch, like the space between flames. All is burning, he repeated. The I is burning, forms are burning, I consciousness is burning. He spoke slowly, deliberately, each word striking like a drumbeat in the still morning air. Burning with what? With the fire of lust, the fire of hatred, the fire of delusion? Some closed their eyes, others frowned. A few leaned forward, their breaths caught. The Buddha looked upon them, not with challenge, but with compassion. This body you cling to, he said, it is a wick. This mind you chase through craving, a spark. And each time you grasp, each time you say, mine, you feed the fire. A breeze moved across the Ganges. It stirred the edges of robes. It cooled nothing. The Buddha continued. The world is ablaze, but not with wood and coal. It burns with longing, with grasping, with thirst. He walked slowly among them, not above, not apart. His steps made no sound. Eyes that chase beauty, ears that crave praise, tongues that seek sweetness, minds that hunger for permanence. He turned and lifted his simple alms bowl. This too is not mine. It holds food today. Tomorrow, it may be empty. I thank it either way. From the back, an old ascetic raised his hand. Are we to abandon joy? He asked. Is not joy the goal? The Buddha smiled faintly. No, he said. Not joy. Only the craving for joy. Let joy arise. Let it come like wind through trees. But do not chase it. Do not bind to it. Do not say, this is mine. For the flame you grasp will burn your hand. Another monk asked quietly, how do we live in a burning world? The Buddha looked at him with eyes deep as a still lake. Like a man who sees the blaze, he said. Who walks with care, breathes with wisdom, and holds no illusion that the fire is shelter. A hush fell over the gathering, not from fear, but from recognition. The fire was not only in the cities, or in war, or in anger. It was inside them, inside each grasping thought, each clenched desire. The Buddha sat upon the earth. He drew a circle in the dust with his finger. Inside this circle, he said, are your perceptions, your feelings, your ideas. They rise like smoke. They change like flame. They disappear like ash. Do not build your home in a fire. A younger monk, no more than 20 summers old, whispered, then where do we dwell, Master? The Buddha looked up. In awareness, he said. In equanimity. In the space between sparks. Be the witness, not the fuel. The monks bowed their heads. Some wept, not from sorrow, but from something else. From release, from clarity, from the sudden lightness of realizing they could put something down. That night, they built no fires. There were no chants, no ceremonies. They ate simply, drank river water, and sat in silence. But the silence was not empty. It was watchful. Each monk sat with his own flickering flame. Some remembered the pain of hunger they had forced upon themselves. Others remembered the pride they had felt when praised for discipline. Some saw anger they had not named, others grief, and they did not suppress these fires. They simply watched. And in the watching, something shifted. Not extinguished, but no longer fed. In the days that followed, the change was quiet but real. Monks who had once worshipped sacred flame, who had walked barefoot on coals, branded their skin, sat in the sun for days, now turned to a gentler discipline. They practiced release. They rose with the sun. They swept the courtyard slowly. They bowed not to fire, but to understanding. When visitors asked them what the Buddha had taught that morning, they did not recite scriptures. They did not speak of rebirth or karma or cosmology. They said only, "He showed us the fire and told us we did not have to live in it." The fire sermon was spoken many times across the years, but none more powerful than that first morning on the river bank, when the smoke from the city's cooking fires curled upward, mirroring the craving in every heart, and the Buddha, with nothing in his hands and peace in his gaze, simply said, "Let it burn, let it pass, and do not be consumed." A house stood at the edge of a quiet village. It wasn't grand. Its roof sagged a little. Its floorboards creaked, but the door was always open, and those who passed by often entered. One day, a traveler knocked. His shoulders were tight with worry, his breath short. He clutched his bag like it held every mistake he'd ever made. The host opened the door and smiled. "Come in," she said gently. "No judgment here, just tea and a place to rest." The next morning the traveller left, but soon another came, this time angry. Fists clenched, jaw locked. The host welcomed him too, showed him to a chair by the fire, listened to him shout, cry, fall silent, then gave him warm bread without asking why he was so upset. They kept coming. Joy danced through the garden one spring afternoon, barefoot and laughing. Grief followed days later, slow, grey, soaking wet from a sudden storm. Loneliness showed up in the middle of the night, shivering. Hope arrived unexpectedly, glowing faintly. Fear sometimes knocked twice in one day. Still, the host opened the door every time. One evening, a boy from the village asked, "Why'd you let them all in, even the scary ones?" The host looked at the boy and said, "Because this house is a guest house, and all emotions are guests. They arrive, they stay, they leave. None of them are me." This story comes from an old Sufi poem by Rumi, beloved also in Buddhist circles. It teaches what meditation often reveals. You are not your emotions. You are the one who notices them, who makes space, who lets them pass through. Anger is not wrong. It is a guest, sometimes loud, sometimes dangerous. But it comes bearing messages, and if you slam the door in its face, it breaks in through the window. Sadness is not weakness. It is a guest. It may rearrange the furniture for a while, It may lie on the couch for days, but eventually it moves on, especially if you sit beside it instead of pretending it isn't there. Joy too is a guest. And though it's tempting to cling to joy and beg it to stay, even joy must leave. That's okay. You can welcome it again tomorrow. The problem is not the emotions. The suffering comes when we believe they are permanent, when we build whole identities around them. I am anxious. I am unlovable. I am angry. But you are not those things. You are the house. They are just visitors. There's a story of a monk who struggled with anxiety. He tried to push it away, ignore it, meditate it into silence. Nothing worked. Until one day, his teacher said, "Stop fighting the visitor. Invite it in, serve it tea, ask it why it came." The next time anxiety returned, the monk didn't resist. He noticed his breath tightening, his chest constricting. And he whispered, "Welcome, you're here again." He didn't like it, but he didn't hate it either. He watched it, listened to it, sat with it, and slowly it softened, and eventually it left. This is what it means to live as a guest house, to offer your presence, your kindness, your non-attachment to whatever arises. It does not mean you let the guests destroy the house. It means you don't mistake them for permanent residents. You set boundaries, but not walls. You show compassion, not control. You practice presence, not possession. Sometimes guests arrive unannounced. Sometimes they slam the door. Sometimes they cry in the middle of the night. That's okay. You breathe. You listen. You stay grounded in the structure of the house. The breath, the body, the awareness that is always home. Commentary. The guest house reminds us of the temporary nature of all emotions. Nothing stays forever, no matter how intense. And by opening the door instead of guarding it with fear or shame, we reclaim something powerful. Agency. Because when you welcome a feeling, you stop being its prisoner. To be the host is not to be passive. It is to be strong, grounded, compassionate enough to say, "This too belongs, but it will not stay forever, and it is not who I am." You are not broken for feeling grief. You are not failing because fear has returned. You are not weak for missing someone. You are alive, and the guest house of aliveness is open to all visitors, even the ones that make us uncomfortable. When you practice this kind of welcoming, something beautiful happens. You stop judging others for their emotions too. You recognize their guests. You become safer, more compassionate, more real, because you've sat with your own visitors. And you know what it means to offer space. So tonight, when something arrives, a pang in your chest, a wave of sadness, a flicker of joy, pause, breathe, and ask gently, "What do you need? You're welcome here. For now." Then let it pass, let it teach you, let it leave, and return to silence. The temple's library held thousands of texts, worn scrolls, faded sutras, ink-smudged commentaries written by hands long returned to dust. Monks came to read by daylight when the sun filtered through paper screens, and the scent of old parchment warmed the air. But one monk always came at night. Her name was May. She was quiet, thoughtful, the kind who listened longer than she spoke. Each evening, after her chores were done, she would carry a single candle into the library and read until wax melted low. One night during the rainy season, the wind howled across the hillside. Storm clouds swallowed the moon. Still, May entered the library, lit her candle, sat cross-legged before a scroll on emptiness. The flame flickered with every gust, but she kept reading. Outside, an owl perched in the eaves, white-feathered, wide-eyed. Still, it watched her, unblinking. As the wind swirled harder, the flame bent. Then, it went out. Darkness, total. May did not panic. She closed her eyes and waited. After a moment, she noticed a soft rustling overhead, feathers, then stillness again. She opened her eyes, and though she could see nothing, she sensed the owl was still there. Watching, she whispered aloud, "How do you see in this?" As if in answer, a line from the sutra she had just read returned to her. "The eye that sees true is not of flesh or flame, but of calm presence in the dark." She smiled softly. Perhaps the lesson wasn't in the candlelight, but in its absence. The next day, she spoke with the abbot. "Master," she asked, "why do we fear the dark so much?" He thought for a while. "Because we trust only what the eye can see. But true wisdom," he said, "often waits in the dark." He continued, "The owl does not light a lantern. It simply sees." From that night on, May still brought her candle, but she also learned to sit after it burned out, not to read, but to observe her breath, her thoughts, her discomfort. And slowly the dark became a teacher. Other monks noticed. May was calmer, slower to speak, gentler when correcting mistakes, as if she no longer needed light to know what mattered. One night, a novice joined her. He fidgeted, grumbled at the dark. "I can't see anything," he said. May smiled. "That's the beginning," she said, "not the problem." There's a Zen saying, "Don't curse the dark, don't worship the light, become the eye that sees in both." The owl never flew down, never made a sound, but its lesson stayed with May until the end of her days. Sometimes, the truest clarity isn't found by shining more light, but by learning to sit still when the candle goes out. Continuing along the path of Zen insight, we pause now to hear a teaching about perception and hidden value. Listen carefully to the next story. The sun hung low over the fields, casting long golden shadows across the dry earth. At the edge of a quiet village, 2 mango trees stood side by side. One was tall and strong, its branches heavy with fruit. Its golden mangoes glowed in the light, plump, sweet and fragrant. Children would stop and stare. Travelers paused to admire. Birds sang in its branches as if drawn to its beauty. The other tree was bare. Its bark was worn, its limbs crooked. It bore no fruit, and no one stopped beneath its shade. But this second tree, quiet, unnoticed, was the Buddha in one of his past lives. And this is the story of why he chose to remain fruitless, for the sake of something greater. Long ago, the land had been wild. The forest grew thick around a small monastery where a humble sage lived with his disciples. He taught them to observe closely, to see not just what was obvious, but what was true. One morning, while walking through the woods, the sage turned to his students and pointed at two saplings growing side by side. "These trees," he said, "were born at the same time, but they will live very different lives." The students blinked. "They look the same," said one. The sage only smiled. "Wait." And the years passed. The first tree grew fast. Its branches stretched wide. Its roots drank deep from the stream nearby. And when its first mangoes came, the villagers discovered them, sweet as honey, smooth as silk. They came in crowds. Children climbed its limbs. Merchants took its fruit to sell in town. Goats rubbed their backs against its bark. Travelers broke its twigs for kindling. Even the birds, once gentle, began to peck at its flowers for their scent. And still, the tree gave, but over time it began to lean. A branch cracked under a child's foot. Its roots loosened from the trampling of cattle. The fruit became harder to grow, and some seasons it had none at all. Still, the people came. The second tree grew quietly. It bore no fruit. No children climbed it. No travelers plucked its leaves. Birds rested gently in its shade but never stayed long. The villagers ignored it, but its bark stayed smooth. Its roots grew deep. Its trunk remained upright and still. And it watched. One summer, the king of the region came to the forest on retreat. He set up camp near the fruiting tree. His cooks, servants, and soldiers lounged beneath its shade, praising its sweetness. Then one of the ministers said, "If this tree has served so well, why not cut it down? The wood would make fine furniture. The fruit is nearly gone, but its trunk could be carved into chairs for your throne room." The king, intrigued, gave the order. And the next day, the great fruiting mango tree was felled. Its branches snapped. Its trunk cracked open. Its roots, noble and deep, were torn from the earth, and all the forest fell silent. Later that week, the king walked through the woods again and saw the second tree, bare, small, and unremarkable. "What of that one?" he asked. His minister shrugged. "No fruit, no use, not even shade. Let it be." And so, it was spared. The sage, watching from a distance with his disciples, bowed slightly to the bare tree. "Do you see?" he said. "Sometimes what survives is not what shines the brightest, but what draws the least desire." The disciples looked at him with puzzled eyes. "But Master, was the fruiting tree not noble? Was its generosity not good?" "Yes," the sage said gently. "It lived a life of service, and that is honorable." He looked toward the bare tree, but this one made a choice, a quiet choice. It saw what happened to its brother, and though it too could have borne fruit, it chose not to, for the sake of survival, for stillness, for watching without being consumed. Many lifetimes later, the Buddha would recount this story to his own monks. He would say, "There are times to serve and times to endure. There is merit in offering yourself to the world, and wisdom in stepping back, not from fear, but from foresight." And the story passed through generations, told to children not to make them afraid of giving, but to teach discernment, to remind them that not all service must be seen, that sometimes quiet restraint is a form of compassion too, because the world will always chase what glows, but sometimes what glows too brightly gets torn down, and what stands quietly survives to keep teaching. She never meant harm. She only passed on what she heard. A whispered comment here, a raised eyebrow there. A half-finished sentence passed along like a secret prayer. Her name was Sister Nima, young, lively, kind mostly, but her words moved quickly and quietly unraveled the thread of trust inside the temple. At first it was small. She meditates longer when people are watching. They say the head cook isn't really vegetarian. I heard the abbot used to be married. No malice, just conversation, just sharing. But soon, monks began to turn away from each other in the corridor. Silent meals grew tenser. Chanting lost its rhythm. Smiles stiffened at the edges. No one named the cause, but it lingered, like smoke with no fire. One afternoon, the abbot asked Sister Nima to join him in the garden. The plum trees were beginning to blossom, delicate petals stirring in the breeze. He held a small bag in his hand. "Walk with me," he said gently. They walked in silence down the path that circled the temple grounds. After a while, he opened the bag and began to scatter chicken feathers along the way. Sister Nima tilted her head. "Why are you doing that?" The abbot didn't answer. When they returned to the garden, he handed her the empty bag. "Now," he said, "go and collect them all." She blinked. "But the wind's taken them. They're scattered everywhere." He looked at her and said softly, "So too with your words." That night she wept. This is the story of speech and consequence, of how sound can build or destroy. Commentary. In Buddhist practice, right speech is one of the Eightfold Path's pillars. It sounds simple, but it is one of the hardest, because words don't vanish when we stop speaking. They ripple, they stain. They take root in someone else's mind, sometimes forever. Sister Nima did not speak with cruelty, but neither did she speak with care. And in that space, in the absence of intention, harm took hold. We often forget how powerful language is. A word can lift someone from despair or push them over the edge. It can invite reflection or ignite shame. Words are not just air. They are actions. They build worlds. There's a Zen saying, "Speak only if it improves upon the silence." Sister Nima filled silence with curiosity, suspicion, drama, and the silence grew quieter, but colder, until no one trusted what they didn't hear. The Buddha once said, "A person is not wise because they speak much. A person is wise when they speak what is true and what causes no harm." That is the gate of right speech. Is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? If it fails even one, it's better to let it drift away like a feather on the wind. After that night, Sister Nima changed. She stopped repeating what others said. She listened more, spoke less. When she did speak, her words came slowly, like water poured from a clean bowl. The monks began to look at her differently, not because she had become wise overnight, but because she was watching herself now, watching what she left behind in others when she spoke. And over time, trust returned to the temple. Not because of a sermon, not because of a rule, but because one person saw the feathers scatter and chose to stop scattering more. So speak with care. Speak like you're building something with your breath. Because you are. Every sentence is a seed, and whether it blooms or bruises is up to you. At the edge of a temple, near the foot of a quiet hill, there lay a stone basin. It had no inscription, no offerings placed before it, no tourists gathered around, but every monk in the monastery knew its story. And when a novice was struggling, that's where the teacher would send them. Go sit by the broken bowl, they'd say, and that was enough. Long ago, the bowl had been whole, carved from a single piece of granite, smooth, strong, revered. It stood in the center of the temple courtyard, used for rituals and alms. Every morning it was filled with clear water. Every evening it was emptied and washed. Then came a winter earthquake, not violent, but enough. A hairline fracture, then a second quake weeks later, and the bowl split down the middle, cracked clean through. It no longer held water. Some said to discard it. Others wanted to repair it. But the abbot, an old woman with kind eyes and a quiet presence, said, "Leave it as it is, let it teach." And so it remained. Years passed. Moss gathered inside the broken seam. Rain pooled only briefly before slipping through the gap. The bowl no longer functioned, but it was not discarded, because in stillness, it began to reveal something else. Monks would sit beside it, touch the cool edge, trace the break with reverent fingers, and slowly, quietly begin to understand. Wholeness does not mean unbroken. The world teaches us to fear breaking, to grieve what cannot be fixed, to measure our worth by our usefulness. But the Dharma invites a deeper seeing, a truth whispered by that silent stone. You are not what you hold. You are what you are. Even when you hold nothing at all. The broken bowl was no longer useful, but it was still itself, still stone, still shaped by care, still part of the temple. Its crack did not remove its belonging. One day, a monk sat beside it after losing his voice. He had been a teacher, a singer of chants. Now, silent, he felt useless, forgotten. Until the abbot brought him to the bowl and simply said, "It doesn't hold water, but it still holds truth." And then she bowed. This is the parable of function and form. So often, we confuse our value with our utility. We think, I can't do what I used to. I've lost my role. I am broken. But even a bowl that no longer holds water can still hold presence, still offer reflection, still rest in the sun, still teach. In Buddhism, there is a phrase, form is emptiness, and emptiness is form. It appears in the Heart Sutra, one of the most profound teachings. On the surface, it sounds like a riddle, but it points to this: what you are is not just your shape, and what breaks doesn't define what remains. Imagine your roles are bowls: parent, artist, teacher, helper, listener. When one cracks, you may feel like you've lost something essential, but you haven't lost you. You are still present, still capable of love, still part of the whole, just as the broken bowl is still part of the temple. One evening, a novice accidentally dropped a cup. It shattered. He looked up in fear, but the teacher only said, "It was already broken." The boy's eyes filled with confusion. The teacher continued, Everything we use is already broken. We just don't see it yet. So we love it while we have it. And when it breaks, we bow. To live with this awareness is not to be gloomy. It is to be free, to care for things deeply, but not cling to them desperately. To understand that even in brokenness, there can be peace. Commentary. The broken bowl reminds us that identity is not function, that worth is not erased by loss, that something can be cracked and still belong, still matter, still offer presence. There is a time to serve, and there is a time to simply be, to be still, to be soft, to be a presence others can sit beside. Like the bowl, like the monk with no voice, like the abbot who teaches with silence. You are not just the things you do. You are not just the roles you fill. You are not just the tasks you complete. When those fall away, when something cracks, what's left? That's the real practice. That's the part of you that watches, that breathes, that remains. Sit beside your own cracked places, not to fix, but to witness. Let them speak. Let them soften you. Let them remind you that even broken things reflect the sky. Even a bowl that holds no water can hold the Dharma. As we drift deeper into the still waters of Zen, a quiet teaching begins to rise, one that speaks of clarity and of value not always seen. Listen gently now. The next story begins. At the edge of a quiet village stood a tree unlike any other. It wasn't tall, wasn't radiant, didn't blossom with brilliant colors in spring, but still, people came. Not to pick fruit, not to seek shade, not to carve initials into its bark. They came to sit, to rest, to listen. Because it whispered, no one knew why. Some said it was the way the wind passed through its hollow trunk. Others believed it was the spirit of an old monk who had meditated there long ago. Children said the tree could speak. Old farmers said it could hear. But whatever the cause, the tree made a soft sound, like breath through a flute, or the hush of cloth moving gently through air. Just enough to quiet your mind. People began to visit it when their hearts were heavy. A woman grieving the loss of her son sat at its roots each morning. She never spoke, but the wind in the branches moved with such rhythm that her shoulders softened, and her tears fell without shame. A man who had lost his business sat by the trunk each evening after working odd jobs in town. He didn't pray. He didn't ask, he simply listened, and each night his breath grew steadier. Even monks came from temples near and far, not to teach, not to chant, but to sit in silence beside the tree, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. One traveler asked the village elder, "What does it say?" The elder smiled. "Nothing. That's the point." This is the story of presence without performance, of healing without explanation, of a silence that doesn't fix, but holds. There are trees in all of us, places in our heart that don't shine loudly, don't offer dazzling gifts, don't do anything, but simply are. And that is enough in a world that demands noise, results, progress, answers, opinions, profiles, performances. The whispering tree reminds us, silence is not emptiness. It is a kind of presence too deep for words. The Buddha once said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." And better still, perhaps, is no word at all, just presence, just sitting, just being. In the Zen tradition, some masters would respond to students' deepest questions by raising a finger, or drawing a circle in the air, or remaining completely silent, not because they had no answer, but because the answer could not be spoken. It had to be realized. The whispering tree was like that. It taught nothing, but revealed everything, if you stayed long enough. There's a story of a student who asked his master, "What is enlightenment?" The master pointed to the mountain. The student frowned. "I don't understand." The master said, "That's because you're still trying to. Some truths don't want to be understood. They want to be felt, held in stillness, carried in the breath." Commentary. We are conditioned to speak, to respond, to fill silences, to offer advice, to explain our pain, to solve others' suffering. But sometimes what's needed is none of that. Sometimes what's needed is what the whispering tree offered. Presence without pressure, silence without absence, listening without fixing. The mind wants sound. The ego wants performance. But the heart wants stillness. It wants to be seen without being judged, heard without being analyzed, held without being improved. You don't have to have the right words. You don't have to be wise. You don't have to fix yourself or anyone else. Sometimes just being there with your whole attention is the most sacred act. The whispering tree didn't change anyone. It didn't speak truths, didn't prescribe practices, didn't offer instructions. But people left it feeling lighter, not because they got something, but because they let something go. Let go of the need to perform, to be impressive, to be certain, to be healed already. Let yourself be the tree. Let yourself be the wind. Let yourself be the stillness between the branches. Silence is not the absence of something. It is the presence of everything. So, when you don't know what to say, don't. When someone is hurting and you want to help, sit with them. When your own heart feels messy, wordless, unsure, be still. Let the whispering begin inside, and trust that silence is a teacher too. The sun rose slowly over the wide green fields, brushing the tops of the grass with gold. Mist drifted over the earth like breath from a dreaming world. And in a quiet corner of the meadow, where the stalks grew thick and the wind passed gently, lived a flock of quail. They were small birds, light-boned and quick, their feathers dappled like earth and sunlight. They lived simply, eating seeds, singing softly, and moving together like a single thought. And among them was one who saw more than the others, who watched not only the sky and the grass, but the patterns within them. He was the Buddha in a past life, and though he had no title or special perch, the others came to trust him, because he noticed what they missed, and he saw what was coming. Each day, the flock flew out into the fields to feed. Each day they returned, wings beating as one, hearts light. But one morning, as the sun rose pale behind thin clouds, the wise quail called the others close. "There is danger coming," he said. The flock stilled. "A fowler is near. He lays traps in the tall grass. If we are not careful, we will be taken." Some of the younger birds flapped their wings in alarm. "Should we stop flying?" asked one. "No," said the wise quail, "but we must act together." He showed them a plan. "If one is caught in the net," he said, "do not panic. Each of us must place our beaks beneath the net. At the same moment, we will lift and fly." "To freedom?" a small chick asked. He nodded. "Yes, together." The flock agreed, and the very next day, the net came. It was hidden beneath the dew-wet grass. A few birds landed without seeing it. With a sudden pull, the fowler sprang the trap. Wings fluttered, cries rang out. But the wise quail shouted, "Now!" as we practiced. The others rushed in, beaks down, wings strong. And together they rose, the net lifted with them, light as silk on the wind. And just beyond the trees, they dropped it, free once more. The fowler, watching from behind a tree, blinked. "Strange," he muttered. "I've never seen birds do that." He returned the next day, and again the next. Each time the net was lifted. Each time the birds escaped. He grew frustrated. "Clever little things," he muttered. "But they won't always be united." And he was right, because fear does not break the flock, but ego can. One morning, two young quail quarreled. "You always land too close," snapped one. "You always peck too fast," the other retorted. Their voices rose. The others turned away, uncomfortable. The wise quail approached them gently. "Remember," he said, "the net does not care who is right, only who is divided." But pride had taken root. The quarrel continued. And the next day, when the net fell again, something changed. The two angry quail were caught. The others flew in, ready to help. "Lift with us," they called. But the two snapped at each other. "You grab that side!" "No, you're too slow." Their beaks tangled, their wings struck each other, and in the confusion, the net stayed down. The fowler emerged from the trees, and that day, not all escaped. The survivors gathered in silence beneath a low fig tree. Even the wind was still. The wise quail spoke, not in anger, but with sorrow. "Together we can lift what traps us, but alone, even a feather becomes too heavy." In time, the flock mended. The young quail apologized, and the net, though dangerous, was never as strong as their unity. The fowler eventually gave up and moved on, and the wise quail remained, never seeking attention, never blaming, but always watching, always reminding them it is not the trap that captures us. It is forgetting that we are stronger together. In quiet monasteries, monks would later chant this story beneath swaying trees. They would bow not to the birds, but to the truth they carried. That unity is not just comfort, it is survival. Because in this world, nets will fall. But if we move with one breath, with one purpose, with one heart, even the strongest snare cannot hold us. He sat beneath the Bodhi tree, its roots like arms cradling the earth, its leaves trembling in the hush before dawn. Siddhartha was still, not because he had nothing left to do, but because he had found the one thing worth doing. The grass beneath him held the warmth of day's memory. The river nearby whispered its ancient lullaby. Above, stars thinned into morning, and within him, the silence grew deep. He had made his vow to remain unmoved until he had reached the end of suffering. And so he breathed in, outside. The body sat like a mountain. The mind watched like the sky. But truth, before it flowers, is always tested, and so came Mara. Mara, the tempter, the king of illusion, the force of resistance in all beings who inch toward awakening. He did not come in one form, but many, not with a single sword, but with 1,000 voices. First, Mara sent desire. His daughters appeared, radiant and swaying. Their forms shimmered with beauty. Their voices sang sweet lullabies of longing and delight. They danced before the still figure under the tree, their laughter like bells. But Siddhartha did not stir. Their beauty held no hook. His gaze did not linger. He saw not bodies, but masks, not pleasure, but impermanence. Desire passed like perfume on the wind. Then Mara sent fear. The sky darkened, thunder cracked, demons emerged from shadows, fangs bared, eyes aflame, weapons of fire and bone in hand. They rushed the tree, screamed into Siddhartha's ears, hurled spears of doubt and arrows of terror. But Siddhartha did not flinch. The weapons turned to lotus petals as they neared him. The demons screamed, but their voices died in the vast silence that surrounded him. Fear had no place where nothing was clung to. Next came pride. Mara appeared himself, seated atop a colossal elephant, cloaked in glory. He laughed with disdain. "Who do you think you are?" he asked. "A prince playing holy man. What gives you the right to seek truth? You are alone, no teacher, no witness." Siddhartha looked up, calm and clear. He reached his right hand to touch the earth. And the earth responded. It is said that in that moment, the earth itself bore witness. The ground trembled gently. A breeze swept through the grove. The Bodhi tree's leaves shimmered like stars. The earth, vast and ancient, acknowledged Siddhartha's right to awaken. Mara's elephant stumbled. His illusions cracked. His army scattered like dust in wind. The tempter vanished, and all was still again. But the night was not yet over. With Mara gone, Siddhartha turned inward, deeper than ever before. He saw his past lives, hundreds, thousands, as farmer and king, as bird and beggar, as woman, child, beast, each life carrying joy and sorrow, birth and death. He saw the law of karma, how intentions shaped outcomes, how cruelty echoed, how kindness grew roots across lifetimes. He saw the chain of suffering, ignorance giving rise to craving, craving to clinging, clinging to becoming, becoming to birth, birth to decay and death. He saw that to break the chain, one must see clearly and let go. The dawn approached. The sky shifted from indigo to pale rose. Birds stirred in branches. The river shimmered. And in the first light of that new day, Siddhartha saw it, not as concept, not as hope, but as direct knowing. He saw the four noble truths, that suffering exists, that it arises from craving, that it can end, and that there is a path to its end. He saw the eightfold path unfolding before him like stepping stones across a great river. He saw suffering, and he saw its end. And in that moment, As the sun broke the horizon and the world breathed anew, Siddhartha became the Buddha, the awakened one. He opened his eyes, and the dew on every leaf sparkled with the same truth. Mara had been defeated, not with sword, not with spell, but with stillness, with clarity, with the earth itself as witness. The man who had walked away from gold and pleasure, who had starved beside the river, who had sat unmoved through storm and illusion, had now touched the infinite. And he smiled, not with triumph, but with compassion, because now he would teach, and the world would begin to wake. With each breath, we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen, where the smallest stone may hold the greatest truth. Here starts the next story. Long ago, in the shadow of the Mahabharata range, there lived a young man named Jorin. He was clever, quick-witted, strong of voice and proud of heart. But Jorin carried something deeper, an anger that lived just beneath his skin, not always cruel, but sharp, like a wind that turned cold without warning. One day, after an argument with his father, Jorin stormed out of their stone cottage and began climbing the mountain trail above their village. "I don't need anyone," he shouted at the trees. But the forest only rustled in reply. He climbed higher until the air turned thin and the path narrowed to rock and dust. At the highest ridge, he stopped and yelled into the vastness below. "I hate you!" The words bounced off stone, and to his surprise, the mountain answered, "I hate you! I hate you!" The echo rang out across the cliffs, his own voice thrown back at him. Jorin blinked. He had never heard the mountain speak before. Curious, he cupped his hands again. "You're a fool!" The echo answered, "You're a fool, a fool." Now he laughed nervously. Then, hesitantly, he tried, "I love you." And again the valley responded, "I love you. Love you." His voice returned, but changed by the silence it passed through. Jorin stood there for a long time, the cold wind tugging at his sleeves, the vastness of the world pressing in. And then he turned back down the path, but quieter than before. This is the story of karma, of how what we send out returns. Commentary. In Sanskrit, karma means action, but not just physical action. Also thought, speech, intention. Each one plants a seed. And those seeds, over time, bear fruit, not as punishment, not as reward, but as response. Like an echo. The mountain did not decide to insult Jorin. It simply returned what was given. This is the truth of karma. The world is not judging you. It is reflecting you. The Buddha once said, "With our thoughts, we make the world." Speak or act with a pure mind, and happiness follows you, like a shadow that never leaves. Most people think karma is about fate, but it's not. Karma is not what happens to you. It's how you move, and what that movement shapes in return. Jorin didn't change overnight, but that moment on the mountain stayed with him. He began to notice the way his words shaped the people around him, how a harsh joke left someone smaller, how a small kindness lifted a room. He didn't always get it right, but now he listened for the echo. One day, years later, Jorin stood at the base of the same mountain. His son, angry about a broken toy, was shouting at the sky. Jorin placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "Careful, little one. The mountain hears." The boy looked up, puzzled, and Jorin smiled. "Speak gently, even when no one answers right away." Because life is an echo. Sometimes it comes back loud, sometimes soft, sometimes years later, sometimes not until your children feel it, but it always returns. So what will you shout into the valley? What kind of world will your words shape? Be mindful of your echoes, because one day you'll hear them again. The forest path was dappled with golden light. Shafts of sun fell through the tall teak trees, casting long shadows that shifted with the breeze. A group of monks walked quietly, their feet bare on the earth, their minds turned inward. They had been traveling for 2 days now, through fields, across shallow rivers, under wide skies that watched without comment. And ahead of them, seated on a smooth, flat stone beside a trickling stream, was the Buddha. He was waiting, not impatiently, but as a mountain waits for the wind. The monks approached and bowed. Some sat, others stood, resting their walking sticks against the roots of a banyan tree. One among them, Ananda, had seen something on the road that troubled him. A farmer's son had been bitten by a snake. He had seen the child cry out, flailing in fear and pain. The boy's wound could be treated, but the panic, the despair that had settled in his eyes lingered in Ananda's heart. And so he asked, "Blessed One, why do some suffer more than others, even when the wound is the same?" The Buddha turned to him gently and answered with a story. "Imagine," he said, "a man walking through a quiet field. The day is calm, the air is warm, and then," he raised his hand, "an arrow strikes him." The monk stirred slightly. He gasps in pain. The wound is deep. The arrow has pierced his flesh. He clutches at it. This, Ananda, is the first arrow. He paused, but then the Buddha's voice softened, deepened. Then the man grows angry. "Why me?" he cries. "What have I done to deserve this?" He curses the heavens. He blames the gods. He weeps not only for the pain, but for the story of the pain. He looked slowly at the circle of listeners. That is the second arrow. Some monks frowned slightly, as if trying to follow an invisible thread. "The first arrow," the Buddha said, "is the pain we cannot avoid. The body ages, illness comes, people leave us, we are wounded by life, by loss, by chance." He drew a line in the dirt with his finger. "But the second arrow is the one we shoot into ourselves." He tapped his chest lightly, with thought, with resistance, with fear, with story. Ananda nodded slowly. "So the suffering comes not only from what happens," he said, "but from how the mind meets it." The Buddha smiled. "Exactly." A young monk, Rahula, tilted his head. "But Lord, if a man is struck by an arrow, how can he not cry out? How can he not fear the pain?" The Buddha's gaze was kind. "He may cry out," he said, "but the wise man does not turn the cry into a prison." He looked at Rahula. "You may feel pain, but you do not have to become pain." The wind rustled through the leaves above them, as if nature itself exhaled in agreement. To feel sadness when a friend dies, that is the first arrow. But to say, I will never be whole again, or I should have done more, that is the second. He pointed to the stream beside them. Water flows. It does not cling to a shape. When pain arises, let it arise. See it, feel it, but do not wrap your identity around it. An older monk, who had once been a warrior, bowed his head. I have carried many arrows in my life, he said softly, not in the flesh, but in memory. The Buddha nodded. The past is full of arrows we keep alive with thought. The future is full of arrows we imagine before they are even shot. He looked toward the trees. But the present holds only the first arrow, and even that, when seen clearly, passes. A silence followed, the kind of silence that isn't empty, but full. The Buddha let it linger. Then he spoke again. You are not wrong to feel pain. You are not less awakened because you grieve, or ache, or tremble. He gestured to his own chest. This body too has known hunger, illness, sorrow. He placed his hand upon the ground. But when pain comes, I do not build a house around it. I do not say, this is me, this is mine, this is forever. He looked at each monk now, one by one. To awaken is not to avoid arrows. It is to stop shooting the second. Later that evening, as the monks prepared camp near a circle of moss-covered stones, a fire crackled quietly in their midst. Ananda sat with Rahula and the older warrior monk. They said little, but their silence was different now. Not numb, not avoidant, just aware. Rahula watched a moth flutter near the flame and whispered, "Even the fire burns only what touches it." Ananda smiled. The old monk closed his eyes. And in that moment, the Buddha's words drifted across the darkness like a breeze through tall grass. The first arrow belongs to the world. The second belongs to you. You can choose to set it down. In time, the teaching of the two arrows would find its way into distant lands, distant minds, translated, adapted, retold. Some would call it psychology. Others would call it mindfulness. Some would not give it a name at all. But beneath every version, the truth would remain. Pain is part of life, but suffering is what we build atop it. A story, a wall, a self. But when we learn to pause, to see the first arrow for what it is, and let go of the second dash, then peace returns, quietly, naturally, like a wound that knows how to heal. It was a quiet station, old stone, metal benches, pigeons pacing like monks in mourning robes. The arrivals board flickered. The loudspeaker crackled, and trains came and went, their breath hissing across the platform like tired beasts. Every day just before noon, an old man would arrive. He wore a flat cap, pressed slacks, a wool coat that had seen better winters. He never boarded. He never greeted anyone. He simply sat. Same bench, same hour, same stillness. At first, people thought he was waiting for someone. A son, a daughter, a wife who might never arrive. They glanced at him with quiet sympathy or soft dismissal, but the days passed. Then weeks, and he was always there, alone, unbothered, still. One day, a young woman sat beside him. She was holding a phone in one hand, tapping constantly, half listening to music in the other ear. She kept checking the time, fidgeting, breathing shallow. The old man looked out at the tracks, unmoving. After a while, she said, almost without looking, "Who are you waiting for?" He smiled. "Nothing." She blinked. "Then why are you here?" He paused, then nodded toward the platform. To wait. This is the story of presence, of sitting in stillness with no outcome, no expectation, and no rush. Commentary. The world runs on arrival. We hurry to meetings, chase after goals, measure our worth by progress, but in the Dharma, there is no arrival, only presence. The old man wasn't avoiding life. He was stepping into it, minute by minute, footstep by breath, like a bell that rings just once, not to announce anything, but because it can. At first, the young woman scoffed. She muttered, "That's kind of pointless." The old man nodded. Yes, and peaceful. She paused, looked at him fully for the first time. There was something settled in his face, not detached, just done chasing. He didn't ask her what she did for work, didn't comment on the news, didn't offer advice. He just sat and breathed. The train came. She didn't get on. Instead, she silenced her music, turned off her phone, sat beside him. They shared the silence for half an hour. It was the first silence she'd had in weeks. The Buddha once said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." The old man said none, and yet peace lingered around him like perfume. He came every day, even in the rain, umbrella in hand, thermos of tea, soft eyes and unhurried limbs. He didn't come to do anything. He came to stop doing. We often misunderstand waiting. We think it's the pause before real life. But sometimes, waiting is life, not for something, but with it. Eventually, the young woman started visiting more often. She brought tea, sat on the same bench, and didn't speak, until one day she asked, "What if the person you were waiting for never comes?" The old man looked at her with a calm smile. "Then I'll still be here." That's the power of presence. It doesn't depend on outcome. It doesn't beg for fulfillment. It simply is. In time, others noticed. A mother sat for 5 quiet minutes with her son. A commuter took off his headphones. A woman reading poetry closed her book and just watched the clouds drift. No one spoke, but something was shifting. Not loudly, not suddenly, like morning fog lifting, unnoticed. And then, one spring day, the old man stopped coming. His bench stayed empty, but the silence remained. So did the stillness, and the space he had created. By doing nothing, expecting nothing, needing nothing. Wasn't empty, it was full of something rare. Peace. The young woman still visits the bench, not daily, not ritually, just when the world starts rushing too fast. She sits, breathes, smiles at passing trains, and once when a man sat beside her and asked, "Who are you waiting for?" she answered, "No one." Then added, "I'm just here." The path of Zen unfolds like morning mist, soft and patient. In this next tale, we are invited to see, beyond appearance, into essence. Listen carefully to the next story. The sun shimmered over the canopy of an ancient forest, casting dappled light onto the wide, glistening river that snaked through its heart. The air was rich with the scent of ripe fruit and warm leaves. Birds called lazily from the branches, and deep in this green sanctuary, there lived a great band of monkeys, free, agile, unafraid. They were led by a king, not crowned with gold nor seated on a throne, but known by every heart in the jungle as a being of rare strength, deep wisdom, and boundless love. He was the Buddha in a past life, and his name was whispered with reverence among the trees, Mahakapi, the great monkey king. The troop followed him not out of fear, but from trust. He chose the ripest fruit for the weakest among them. He led them across rivers in flood. He taught the young how to leap, and the old how to rest. And when predators stalked the forest floor, he stood between his people and the teeth of death. But even such noble creatures cannot stay hidden from the eyes of kings. Far downstream, where the river widened and palace walls gleamed under the sun, there lived a human king. He was wealthy, powerful, and restless. One morning, while drinking sweet water from a golden cup, he bit into a mango unlike any he had tasted. Its flesh was fragrant, smooth, almost glowing. He turned to his servants, astonished. "Where did this come from?" he demanded. A trembling servant bowed low. "From the northern forest, Your Majesty. It was carried by the river." The king stood. "Then that forest shall be mine." And so he rode, hundreds of soldiers at his back, their armor clinking like distant thunder. Across plains, over hills, and into the great northern woods they marched, until they reached the grove where the mango tree stood. Its branches curved wide, heavy with golden fruit. And high in its arms, the monkeys feasted. The king looked up, and his joy turned to fury. "They steal what is mine," he said. "Surround the tree. Not one escapes." His archers raised their bows. The monkeys screamed and scrambled. Some fell. Some clung to the bark, trembling. Mothers shielded their babies. The tree that had fed them now became a trap. And the monkey king, Mahakapi, watched from a distance. He saw the ring of soldiers, the drawn bows, the trembling hearts of his people, and he knew there was no way down. Unless he climbed a tall cliff beside the river. From there he could see the mango tree, the forest, the fear. He wrapped his legs around the trunk of a strong bamboo stalk, measured the distance, and leapt. Across the sky he soared, limbs outstretched, heart steady. He reached the tree, but not the ground. His body caught a branch, and he hung there, arms extended, back arched across the gulf between safety and slaughter. A living bridge. He turned his head and called out, "Go! Cross me, now!" One by one, the monkeys scrambled onto his back. They clutched his fur, their tiny hands trembling. Some hesitated. Some wept. But they crossed, from danger to safety, over the back of the king who held and held and held, until the last one was gone. In the grove below, the human king had seen everything. He watched the great monkey fly, watched him cling, watched him bear the weight of an entire nation, and now he watched him fall. The monkey king's body gave out, muscles torn, spine twisted. He collapsed at the base of the tree, breath shallow, limbs crumpled like leaves after a storm. The human king approached, silent. This was not the enemy he imagined. This was not a beast. This was something else. He knelt. The monkey king opened his eyes. "You could have run," the human king whispered. "You could have saved yourself." The monkey breathed barely. But what would a king be without his people? Tears welled in the king's eyes. He had marched to conquer, to taste fruit, to claim land. But he had found something far richer: honor, selflessness, sacrifice. He turned to his soldiers. "Tend to him," he ordered. "Treat him with care." But it was too late. The monkey king's breath slowed and then stopped. The human king built a shrine there, beneath the mango tree, not for conquest, not for glory, but for a being who had shown him what true kingship meant. And from that day on, he ruled differently, not with fear, but with wisdom, not with pride, but with service. He remembered the curve of that body stretched across space, the silence in which it held, the lesson it gave. Centuries later, the story would be carved into stone, painted onto temple walls, and passed from one mouth to another like a sacred fruit. Children would ask, "Is it true? Did a monkey really give his life?" And the elders would smile. "Yes," they'd say, "and in doing so, he taught the world how to live." Because sacrifice is not weakness, it is strength in its purest form. And a leader is not the one who commands the most, but the one willing to give the most, even his life, for those who trust him, for the good of all. It was night when the master pointed. The moon hung low over the monastery roof, pale and full, casting silver light across the silent garden. A group of monks stood beside him, robes drawn tight against the wind. The master raised his hand and extended one finger toward the sky. "See that?" he said. The students nodded. "The moon." He shook his head. "Number that is the finger." Then he smiled softly. "And what it points to is the moon." The monks stood still, unsure. The wind moved the trees. The master lowered his hand and whispered, "Don't mistake the finger for the moon." This is one of the most repeated teachings in Zen, because the mind is hungry for signs, hungry for symbols, hungry for teachers, for teachings, for shapes and systems. It sees the finger and calls it truth, but the finger is just pointing. It is not the truth itself. Imagine you're lost in the forest. A guide lifts a lantern. You follow the light, but mistake the lantern for the destination. You begin polishing it, worshipping it, writing poems about its handle and flame. But you never leave the forest, because the lantern was not meant to be your home. It was meant to show you the path. That's what Zen does. It points, but if you hold too tightly to the pointing, you never arrive. Buddha's words, the sutras, the rituals, even meditation, they are fingers. Beautiful, wise, luminous fingers. But if you cling to them, if you name them truth, you stop short of the moon. A monk once asked his teacher, "What is the nature of ultimate reality?" The teacher held up a flower, just a flower. The monk bowed. He understood, because the flower was not the answer. It was the invitation to stop asking, to just see, to be. There's a story of a man crossing a river. The bridge is narrow, the current strong. Halfway across, he freezes, looks down at the water and panics. He shouts to a traveler behind him, "Help me understand this bridge." The traveler laughs gently. "You don't need to understand it," he says. "Just walk." Zen does not fear the unknown. It welcomes it, because the unknown is where truth lives. Not in definitions, but in direct experience. Not in the finger, but in the sky beyond it. Many people come to Zen hoping for words that explain. But the moment something is explained, it is no longer what it was. It becomes a concept, a mental model, and reality, true, breathing, silent reality, evaporates behind the map. Once, a young monk read every sutra he could find. He could recite the Eightfold Path, the 5 aggregates, the 4 noble truths. He knew Sanskrit terms. He quoted the Buddha with reverence. But he was restless. He asked his teacher, "Why do I still feel distant from awakening?" The teacher smiled and walked him outside. The moon was rising. The teacher pointed. The student followed the finger. "See it?" the teacher asked. "Yes," the monk said. "The moon." The teacher chuckled. "Number, that's still my finger." The monk blinked, and then, like a soft breeze over water, he understood. To point is not to possess. To teach is not to trap. Even the Buddha said, "My teachings are like a raft, meant to cross the river, not to carry on your back once you reach the shore." But many cling to the raft. They decorate it, argue over whose raft is best, then forget to cross. The finger and the moon, words and truth, map and terrain. All teachings are like this. Zen does not dismiss the finger, but it urges you not to stop there. Because no teacher can give you the moon. They can only point. The rest is silence, attention, direct seeing, commentary. This koan is not just about Zen. It is about how we relate to everything. A lover says, "I love you," and we cling to the phrase, replaying it in our minds. But the real love was in the look, in the moment, in the breath before the words. The words were the finger, the love was the moon. We read books about mindfulness, but forget to be mindful. We quote wise sayings, but live unawake. We chase spiritual techniques, but miss the moment itself. The way the light falls through leaves, the sound of tea being poured, the feel of wind on bare skin. These are the moon, director. Immediate, alive. When you sit in meditation, thoughts will rise. Names, labels, questions. That's the finger, let it point. But keep looking beyond, to what has no name. No answer, only presence, only this, only now. If you walk away with only the finger, you miss everything. But if you let it lead you, quietly, gently, without clinging, you may one day look up and find yourself under the full moon, smiling, and no longer needing to explain why. The road to Kusinara was quiet, not silent, never that, but filled with the hush of a world preparing to let go. Leaves rustled without wind. Birds called, but softly, like they too were watching. The monks walked in silence, their robes brushing against dry earth. And at the front, Supported by Ananda's steady hand, walked the Buddha. His body was frail. The form that had once walked hundreds of miles barefoot, that had sat unshaken through storms, through temptation, through hunger, now trembled with every step. His ribs showed like lines drawn in dust. His shoulders drooped like branches in drought. But his eyes were clear, bright, as steady as the day he left the palace gates. They reached a grove of sal trees on the outskirts of the small village of Kusinara. The Buddha paused. "Here," he said softly. "Let us rest here. This is a good place." The sal trees stood in silent formation, tall, pale, and blooming out of season, their white blossoms drifting like snow. Some monks whispered that the trees had awakened too, that nature itself knew what was coming. Ananda laid down a folded robe beneath his teacher's head. The others formed a soft ring around them, as if holding the space open, sacred and still. The Buddha reclined on his right side, in the lion's posture, facing west. His breathing was shallow but steady. The light of the setting sun turned the dust gold. "It is time," he said. "The body is like a worn cart, held together by straps and will. It has served its purpose. Let it be." Ananda knelt beside him, eyes already full of tears. "You always said not to cling," he whispered. "But I don't know how not to." The Buddha turned his gaze to his beloved attendant. "You have served with a heart free of self, Ananda, for 25 years, never once wavering. You have been my shadow in daylight, my shelter in storm. You are not losing me. You are gaining the path." Ananda bowed, his forehead to the earth. "But the world will feel so empty without your footsteps." The Buddha smiled gently. "Then fill it with your own." Word spread through Kusinara like a breeze stirring dry leaves. The Blessed One is near death. Men and women came with offerings, not of gold, but of rice, of garlands, of silence. Some stood at a distance, unable to speak. Others stepped forward and bowed low, their heads pressed to the soil. A blacksmith named Kunda came, humbly bearing a meal. A dish of mushrooms and tender greens, prepared with utmost care. The Buddha accepted it with gratitude and blessed the man. Later, as pain overtook him, he turned to Ananda. "Tell Kunda this," he said. "He should feel no regret. 2 meals in my life stand out. The first, offered by Sujata, gave strength for awakening. This one gives strength for release. Both are sacred. Both are complete." Ananda nodded, committing the words to memory. The sun dipped low. The monks gathered beneath the sal trees, their hearts heavy. Some sat in deep meditation. Others simply watched their teacher, afraid to blink. The blossoms continued to fall gently, like the breath of the world slowing down. The Buddha opened his eyes. "Perhaps some of you think the teacher is gone. We have no one to guide us now, but that is not so." His voice was calm, though each word required effort. "You must be your own lamps. Be a refuge unto yourselves. Take the Dharma as your island. Do not look outside for shelter." A long silence followed. Then he added, with clarity that cut through every grief, "All compounded things are subject to decay. Strive with diligence." He closed his eyes and entered deep absorption, one state after another, like ripples fading across a pond. First through the 4 jhanas, then through the formless states, boundless space, boundless consciousness, neither perception nor non-perception, and then beyond. His breath slowed, then faded, then stopped. But the silence that followed was not empty, it was whole. The sal blossoms fell across his body. One landed gently on his brow. Ananda did not cry at first. No one did. The stillness was too vast. It reached into them. It opened a space that no sorrow could fill. A hush settled over the grove, deeper than sleep, deeper than night. Even the birds fell quiet. Even the wind held back. And then, as if cued by the moment, the sal trees swayed. Not with breeze, but with knowing, with reverence. The Blessed One had passed into parinirvana. They sat for hours, no words, no movement, just presence. Some monks touched their foreheads to the ground. Others sat upright, spine like a mountain, anchoring the grief in stillness. When finally the moon rose, round and full, like a soft eye watching from above, Ananda stood. "He is gone," he said softly, voice breaking. "No," whispered another monk, a younger one. "He is everywhere now." The cremation took place days later. They built a pyre of fragrant sandalwood, wrapped his body in layers of clean cloth and placed it with care. 8 royal families sent emissaries to claim relics, and a solemn agreement was reached. The remains would be divided equally, enshrined in stupas across the land. But the true relic was not ash. It was the teaching, the 4 noble truths, the eightfold path, the silence behind the breath, the calm behind the storm, the truth that lives on not in memory, but in practice. In time, monks and nuns would walk for weeks to reach that sal grove. Some would come in silence. Others would chant, but all would feel something shift as they stepped beneath the trees. They would sit on the earth where the Buddha last rested and listen, not for sound, but for understanding. And sometimes, if the wind was just right, they would hear it, strive with diligence. Ananda, as the years passed, returned often. He would sit beneath the very tree where he had knelt that night. He would run his hand along its bark, worn smooth now by the prayers of many. He would remember the final gaze, the final breath, and the words that lingered after everything else had passed away. All things that arise must pass, but the path is timeless. And in the stillness there would be no fear, only peace. And so that is how he left, not in triumph, not in spectacle, but in peace, wrapped in stillness, under trees that bloomed out of season, as if even nature bowed to the one who no longer clung. And in that final moment, the world did not end. It simply continued, quieter, wiser, and forever changed. In the hush of understanding, Zen offers us another glimpse of what it means to recognize worth not by weight or shine, but by presence. Here starts the next story. A monk walked along a dusty trail, his robe fluttering slightly with each step. The morning air was clear, the sun warm but soft. A few birds called lazily from the treetops, but the monk's brow was furrowed. He had been sent to deliver a letter to a nearby monastery, and he was late. He had misread the schedule, taken the wrong turn, and now walked quickly, heart agitated beneath his robe. Each step struck the earth too hard. Each breath was shallow. His mind raced ahead. Will they think me careless? How could I have made such a mistake? I should have left earlier. What kind of monk forgets the path? Then he heard a voice behind him. Excuse me, Sir Monk. He turned to see a young boy, no older than 10, running up the path barefoot. He held something cupped in his palms. The monk paused. Yes? The boy stopped, panting, and held out his hands. Inside them sat a small, round pebble, no bigger than a thumbprint. It's beautiful, isn't it? The boy said. The monk looked down. It was smooth, flecked with tiny bits of crystal, glinting gently in the light. I found it near the stream, the boy said. It looked lonely. I thought maybe someone should notice. The monk smiled politely. That's kind of you. He began to turn away, but the boy looked up at him and said something that stopped him mid-step. Did you see any of the flowers you passed today? The monk blinked. What? The boy tilted his head. You've walked almost a mile. The path is full of little blue flowers, but your robe is dusty and your eyes are tight. You didn't see any of them, did you? The monk looked down at the pebble again. Then slowly, he sat on a flat rock at the side of the path. The boy grinned and plopped down beside him, offering the pebble again. And the monk, still holding the unopened letter, took it gently in his hand. This is the story of mindfulness in ordinary things. Commentary. In Zen, we often speak of awakening as though it is some great flash of light or a sudden shift in consciousness. But often, awakening is small, like noticing a flower you've walked past for weeks, or hearing the sound of your own breath after a hard day, or holding a pebble that simply is. The monk had been walking as if his destination were the only thing that mattered. His hurry had made him blind. Not because he lacked wisdom, but because he had left the present moment behind in favor of imagined shame and future apologies. The boy, with no training and no robe, was more awake than he, not because he had studied sutras, but because he saw what was in front of him, and he shared it. There's a Zen phrase: the miracle is not to walk on water, but to walk on the earth. The monk delivered the letter later that day, but he took a different path back, slower, softer. He paused to notice the flowers the boy had spoken of, tiny blossoms with indigo petals, scattered like spilled paint across the roadside. He bowed to them, then reached into his robe and touched the small pebble still in his sleeve. After that, he kept it on the windowsill beside his mat, not as a relic, but as a reminder that awareness begins not with enlightenment, but with noticing what's already here. We spend our lives waiting for bigger signs, bigger truths, more impressive moments. But the sacred is everywhere, in the weight of a spoon, the hush of dusk, the rhythm of footsteps, the coolness of a cup before tea is poured. The boy in the story grew up. He never became a monk. But he taught his children to pause, to touch the bark of trees, to look into puddles after rain, to name the colors of the sky at sunset. And his children did the same. Sometimes the greatest teachers do not stand at the front of a hall. They kneel by a stream and lift a stone, so let the pebble teach you. Let it slow you down. Let it whisper, this moment matters too, in the heart of a wealthy city, wrapped in silk and stone, lived a man who had everything. Gold draped his halls. Ivory framed his mirrors. Incense curled in soft waves from brass burners that never cooled. His name was Viran. He owned land, warehouses, servants, even ships that crossed oceans bearing his name on their sails. And yet, he could not sleep. Each night, he turned beneath embroidered sheets, his mind counting coins like sheep. Each morning, he awoke with new orders, new demands, new acquisitions. He kept building, kept gathering, but inside there was a tightness he could not name. One day, as he stepped from his carriage, he noticed a beggar sitting beside the temple gate. The beggar's robe was faded and torn. His alms bowl was empty, but his eyes were calm, still as a pond before dawn. Viran glanced at him and scoffed. "If I had nothing," he said, "I would not smile." The beggar bowed. "If you truly had nothing," he said, "you might finally know peace." The words followed Viran like a shadow. He tried to forget them, tried to drown them in wine, in silk, in celebration. But they clung like a thread caught in the lining of his soul. The next morning, he returned to the temple. The beggar was still there, eyes closed, back straight, breath soft. "How do you do this?" Viran asked. "You have no food, no roof, no gold, and yet you sit like you own the world." The beggar opened his eyes. "I do not own the world," he said, "but the world no longer owns me." Viran stared. Something inside him cracked. That day he left behind his ring. The next, his jeweled belt. Then quietly, he began walking to the temple each morning, leaving behind one possession at a time. No ceremony, no announcement, just letting go, piece by piece. The beggar never asked, never praised. He simply shared his seat on the stone step. Weeks passed. One morning, Viran arrived barefoot. No rings, no silks, no guards, only his breath and the ache in his knees. He sat beside the beggar, closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he felt nothing pulling at him. No hunger for more, no fear of losing, no need to be seen, just stillness. He opened his eyes. "Have I become poor?" he asked. The beggar smiled. "No," he said softly. "You've become free." This is the story of true wealth, the kind that doesn't glitter, but glows from within. Commentary: wealth is not evil, it is neutral. Like a knife, it can feed or wound. Like fire, it can warm or consume. The Buddha taught that attachment, not possession, is the root of suffering. You can have little and still cling. You can have much and still be free. The beggar was not rich in gold, but he had space. He had his breath, his presence, his peace. He was not owned by anything, not even his own suffering. The parable reminds us, you are not your bank balance, not your reputation, not your wardrobe or your followers. You are the one who notices, the one who breathes, the one who can let go. Letting go is not about loss. It is about choice. When you no longer need a thing to feel complete, you are free to enjoy it or leave it without fear. That is the highest wealth. There's a Zen proverb, "When I had nothing, I had everything." It does not mean destitution. It means this: when your hands are not full of fear and control, they are finally open to life. So whether you own much or little, ask yourself, do these things serve me? Or do I serve them? If they crumble, do I crumble too? Or am I the same presence, the same breath, the same open sky? Regardless, true wealth is not counted. It is felt. It is the spaciousness of a mind that can sit still beside a bowl, empty or full, and smile just the same. Be that kind of rich. The novice stepped forward, eyes low, robes gathered neatly in his arms. He had heard whispers of the great master Joshu, of his clarity, of his presence, of the way his words, brief, sharp, could undo years of illusion in a single moment. And so, the novice came with a question, simple, ancient, and burning. He bowed deeply. Does a dog have Buddha nature? Joshu looked at him, quiet as a still pond, then said, Moo. Just that. One word, moo. The novice blinked. He had expected a teaching, a parable, perhaps even a sermon on interdependence or karma. But all he got was this one syllable, moo. Number not no, as in rejection, but moo, as in as in empty, as in beyond yes or no. The novice opened his mouth to speak again, to clarify, to plead for context. But Joshu had already returned to trimming the bonsai. And the novice was left standing there, holding a question that would not let go. Does a dog have Buddha nature? In the Mahayana tradition, the answer is yes. All beings have Buddha nature, even the smallest ant, even the vilest criminal, even the barking dog on the dusty street. The Heart Sutra says, form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. So why did Joshu say moo? It wasn't to contradict the sutras, it was to shock the mind out of seeking answers like stones in a riverbed. For weeks, the novice could not sleep. He replayed the moment again and again. He wrote MU in his journal. He whispered it during walking meditation. He shouted it into the wind. He carried it like a thorn in the foot, every step made sharper by its presence. One night, a senior monk approached him in the meditation hall. "Why do you look so troubled?" he asked. The novice bowed his head. "Master Joshu gave me a koan. Does a dog have Buddha nature?" He said, "Moo! I don't understand." The monk smiled gently. "You won't." "Not yet." The novice frowned. "Then what should I do?" "Burn your logic," said the monk, "and sit." In the centuries that followed, Joshu's Mu became the first koan in the Gateless Gate, a collection of paradoxical encounters meant to tear open the mind. And it is said that some monks meditated on Mu for 5 years, 10, even 20. Not because the question was hard, but because the answer required the death of the one asking it. Mu is not a word, it is a doorway, but it has no latch, no hinges, no frame. Only a gate that exists because the mind insists there must be one. And the moment you stop trying to walk through it, it disappears. The novice became obsessed. He stopped eating. He stopped speaking. He carried Mu through every moment like a fever dream. He touched it while pouring tea. He chewed it like rice. He sat with it in the dark until the wind outside sounded like it was chanting back to him. "M, m, m." he began to tremble. And still, no clarity, no breakthrough, only silence. One dawn, after 300 days of silent retreat, he broke. He stood in the rain, lifted his head to the grey sky, and shouted, "What is Mu?" The sound echoed against the temple walls. A bird fluttered. A branch creaked, but nothing answered. He fell to his knees, not in defeat, in surrender, not to ignorance, but to not knowing. And in that moment, he let go, not just of the question, but of the one who needed the answer. And that's when it happened. Not a flash, not a thunderclap, just a quiet shift, a falling away, and everything returned. The wind, the breath, the feeling of water on his skin, the sound of a dog barking in the distance. Nothing extraordinary, and yet everything was different. He stood, he laughed, he bowed. Later, when the novice returned to Yoshu, the master asked no questions. He looked once in the monk's eyes and simply said, "Good." Nothing more, because no explanation was needed. You cannot explain Mu, you can only become it. Commentary. In Western terms, we often ask, is it this or that? Zen asks, who is asking? Yoshu's Mu is not a negation of the dog's Buddha nature. It is a negation of the very framework of the question. To ask, does a dog have Buddha nature, is to separate Buddha nature from dog, to assume that it's something a being might possess. But Buddha nature is not a possession. It is not a label. It is the breath before thought, the space before division. Mu is the erasure of the chalkboard before the question is even written. Zen does not want you to answer the question. It wants the question to consume you. Until there's nothing left. Until only presence remains. Until even Mu is forgotten. And the wind in the pines is enough. The gateless gate is open to all. But to pass through, you must stop trying to pass. You must stop searching for the latch. There is no Mu outside yourself. It is not in the words of sutras, not in the mind's debate. It is here, now, when all seeking stops and the moment is allowed to be, just as it is. Even a barking dog, even your own confusion, even the silence after reading this sentence. As the lantern of awareness glows a little brighter, we come to a tale about seeing with more than the eyes. Let the stillness guide you now, and listen carefully to the next story.